Dipesh Chakrabarty's book Provincializing Europe, published in 2000, is one of the most important works in post colonial theory. The title captures its main idea perfectly. To provincialize Europe does not mean rejecting European thought or being anti Western. Instead, it means recognizing that Europe has been falsely set up as the universal standard for all human history, politics, and social science. For too long, European ideas about citizenship, the state, civil society, rights, and secularism have been treated as the only proper way to understand the world. Chakrabarty writes from the perspective of modern South Asia, especially India. He argues that European political categories are both necessary and inadequate for understanding non European societies. They are necessary because we cannot think about social justice, modern critique, or institutional rights without using this intellectual inheritance. They are inadequate because they flatten out the rich diversity of local histories and life practices. They reduce non European societies to just stepping stones on a single path toward a universal future of capitalism and progress. Chakrabarty wants to show that this way of thinking is deeply flawed, that we need to open up space for other ways of being human. The main target of Chakrabarty's critique is historicism. Historicism is a way of thinking that says to understand anything, you must see it as a whole that develops over time. The problem is that this way of thinking assumes a single timeline of development. Some societies are seen as further along this timeline than others. Europe is placed at the front and everyone else is somewhere behind. Historically, this idea was used to justify colonialism. European thinkers argued that colonized peoples were not yet ready for self government. They were put in a waiting room of history, needing to be educated and disciplined by Europeans before they could become proper citizens. Even radical thinkers like Marx sometimes fell into this trap. They assumed that the path taken by Europe, from feudalism to capitalism to socialism, was the only path for everyone else. For Chakrabarty, this is a huge mistake. He draws on the work of Ranajit Guha and the Subaltern Studies group, who showed that peasant and tribal political actions in India were not just backward remnants of the past. They were modern political acts in their own right. They were not simply waiting to become like Europeans. They were already engaging with power and politics on their own terms. By labeling them as pre political, historicism denies them their full humanity and agency. To break free from historicism, Chakrabarty introduces a powerful distinction borrowed from a creative reading of Marx. He calls it the difference between History 1 and History 2. History 1 is the universal story of capital. This is the grand narrative of commodity exchange, profit making, and abstract labor. It assumes a single empty time where everything unfolds in a straight line. It presents capitalism as a totalizing force that eventually absorbs every corner of the globe and reduces all human relationships to economic transactions. This is the story that historicism tells. History twos, on the other hand, are the diverse, messy, and multiple life practices that exist alongside capital. These include kinship ties, religious commitments, affective attachments, and non capitalist relationships. Chakrabarty insists that these are not just relics of a pre capitalist past that will inevitably disappear. They are generated and sustained right now in the present. They constantly interrupt and modify the totalizing power of capital. By introducing history tools, Chakrabarty argues that capital can never achieve complete control over human consciousness and everyday life. People do not live by economic logic alone. Their lives are saturated with relationships and commitments that refuse to be reduced to the dry categories of bourgeois economics. This means that there is always room for resistance and alternative ways of living. Another important part of Chakrabarty's argument is his critique of translation. Traditional colonial historiography assumes that local concepts and practices could be easily mapped onto universal European categories. This was called rough translation. For example, an Indian village council might be translated as local government or a religious festival as social gathering. But this process erases the unique meaning and significance of these practices. Genuine translation does not produce neat equivalence. Instead, it preserves difference and incommensurability. When we study non European societies, we encounter life worlds that are inhabited by gods, spirits, and non secular ways of understanding time. These cannot be reduced to mere superstition or social facts. These are real forces in people's lives and must be taken seriously on their own terms. To illustrate this, he points to examples like the brilliant Indian mathematician Ramanujan or the physicist Raman. These men operated at the highest levels of modern universal science. At the same time, they participated in ritualistic and religious life practices without seeing any contradiction. For them, modern rationality and traditional spirituality coexisted perfectly naturally. This shows that human reason does not need to dominate every aspect of life under a single secular banner. People can hold multiple ways of being in the world without conflict. He also draws from Martin Heidegger's idea of fragmentariness. He suggests that human existence is always incomplete and fractured. We are never fully present to ourselves or to the world. This fragmentariness is not a flaw to be fixed, it is the fundamental feature of being human. Non European life worlds, with their gods and spirits, are not less modern or less rational. They simply express this fragmentariness in different ways. In the end, Chakrabarty asks us to hold two contradictory things together at the same time. First, we must remain committed to the universal categories of Enlightenment thought. We need ideas like citizenship, rights, and secularism to fight against modern injustices. These categories give us the language and tools to criticize oppression and demand equality. Second, we must constantly disrupt and decenter those very categories. We must do this by listening to the diverse, plural, and non totalizable experiences of history tools and subaltern powers from the margins. These experiences remind us that there are many ways to be modern and many ways to be human. They show us that European history is not the only story and that it is not even the main story. By maintaining this dynamic friction, post-colonial thought opens up new horizons. It allows us to imagine a world that is radically heterogeneous, where multiple histories and life practices coexist. It frees human history from the suffocating assumption that Europe holds the monopoly on the human experience. Chakrabarty's work is not about rejecting Europe. It is about putting Europe in its proper place as one region among many, with its own particular history, not as the universal template for everyone else.